Our reading today is up to their necks in it. That it was a reading from The Economist. A hereditary Hindu priest, Veerbhadra Mishra, is wont, slowly after sunrise, to totter down the stone steps of his temple to the Ganges River, and there perform a three-part ritual. He touches the sacred water. He dips himself in it. He cups it in his hands and he drinks it. Mr. Mishra, 70, can't make it down to the river every day. The steps are steep and the river level at Varanasi, Hinduism's holiest city, has fallen. Diversion of the river water for industry, agriculture, and dozens of upstream cities is the cause of this. So to save Mr. Mishra's creaking knees, his acolytes sometimes bring him a morning cup of Ganges water, a cloudy brown soup of excrement and industrial waste to relish. Mr. Mishra has contracted typhoid, polio, jaundice, and other waterborne ailments. A hydrologist turned environmental activist, he reasonably assumes that his morning devotions are to blame. Downstream from the factories and waste outlets, 60,000 devotees perform daily ablutions in the river. I invite you as well, in your little corner of your screen, you might have like a little box icon that has a little box in it. If you press it, my face should become big and the screen should become little. So that's an option that you have if you either want to reflect on the image that I've selected for this sermon or want to see me talking to you more directly. So years ago, before I began seminary, I witnessed what it looks like when faith and spiritual practice are central to people's lives. And when that faith and spiritual practice connects them with the place where they live, specifically connects them with a part of their geographic environment, i.e., where faith and place meet. In specific, along this pilgrimage of mine, I journeyed to Varanasi, to the banks of the Ganges, to Mother Ganges, and I saw thousands of people living their faith every day. In the early morning light, entire families, entire neighborhoods climbed down the steps of the ghats in their saris and their loincloths to bathe, wash their teeth, worship, and be in community. Why was this? Because they believed that entering the Ganges washes away all sins. In fact, they call the Ganges Mother Ganges. They believe the Ganges itself was a goddess. And interestingly, in Hindu philosophy, this goddess has no mean streak. The goddess, though the river itself can kind of cause devastation, the goddess was only kind and nurturing. So the Ganges is part of their religion and also their culture, and for them it's a means of healing and salvation. In short, the Ganges is their lifeblood. It's also currently the life-sustaining water for almost 400 million people. So I made sure when I was planning my half vacation, half spiritual pilgrimage across Asia that I would pay my respects to the Ganges. And one February day, I was there at last. First from the shore and then from this little rowboat, I watched the people. I didn't join them as I originally imagined. For years, I wanted to wade into the Ganges and feel its holy water on my skin. But I didn't, because I knew how polluted the waters of the Ganges were. After 5 weeks of sterilizing gallons of water a day, taking my malarial pills, and reading about environmental pollution, I just wasn't going to live dangerously. I knew that a single drop of water could make me seriously ill, and I had already experienced that some weeks before. And so I just carefully dipped my little fingertips in, and I thought, I'm touching the Ganges. Now, many of the people I saw bathing at the Ghats have so much faith in the Ganges that they will disavow any evidence that says its polluted waters can be harmful to their health. To them, the Ganges can only heal. Then there is Mr. Mishra, the man I was reading about in The Economist, a Hindu priest by heritage, an environmental scientist by choice. He has studied the pollutants and the diseases in the Ganges. He is the most reputable voice in the field. Mr. Mishra knows the Ganges. He knows the dangers intellectually and personally. He has suffered through serious illness after serious illness because he has drunk this water, and yet he returns and returns and he returns. He drinks a glass of water from the Ganges every day, for this is what his ancient faith has instructed him to do. Mr. Mishra keeps returning to his spiritual source for replenishment, even though it causes him to be sick. I dipped my fingers in, and he drinks a glass every morning. It is his daily spiritual practice. Now, I think it would be really, really fair for any one of us to say, A, that's really gross, and B, like, shouldn't he stop? Isn't it reasonable to let go of a faith practice that harms one? And I think that's obviously a choice that I would personally make given this. But I think that there's something really important to remember here as well, which is that the ritual built within Hinduism that instructs him to go and to perform ritual at the Ganges and to literally imbibe it also calls his attention to how vital the waters are of the Ganges. Not just there, but really how vital it is that they be kept clean enough for human beings to drink. I believe that it is his daily practice that caused him to recognize how his ancient faith tradition and how the modern exploitative world were clashing against each other, and brought him into his work as a hydrologist to help clean up the water as his faith instructed. Now, we might think this is just about Mr. Mishra and the Ganges, but when I was at Standing Rock, I saw the elders and First Nation peoples do something very similar. Close to dawn every morning, they would gather at the sacred fire, and chanting and singing the songs of their people, they paraded and processed down to the riverbank, the river that they were working to protect as water protectors. The water, and that water inspired the phrase that was the rallying cry of that movement: water is life. There they would drink from the water that they were also seeking to protect. It goes even further and well beyond water. There was a text that I found when I was 26, and an eager and overzealous congregant at All Souls in DC. I taught an Echoes theology course, and I found this little text of that was written by this Buddhist monk in China. And essentially, the Buddhist monk says, our local Buddhist teachings always said that this little kind of low mountain over there was sacred. And because it was sacred, we were never supposed to farm on it or build it on it or anything. And for a long time, when our religion was allowed to have a say over land, that mountain was protected. But when our religion was considered arbitrary or less than important to political decisions, then farmers began to farm there, and we quickly discovered that it wasn't great farmland, and in fact, that mountain was highly prone to erosion. And so after one or two harvests, the land was no longer good, and all the land had eroded, and all that topsoil had gone into the river, and it was too much soil, and it had damaged the fish, and it affected the whole ecosystem. What these ancient rituals and texts began to teach me was that many religions around the world had used storytelling, ritual, tradition to claim certain parts of the ecosystem as sacred that were extremely vital to the whole. Now, as Unitarian Universalists, and particularly as Unitarian Universalists living here in central Indiana, very few of us can claim that our ancestors lived on this land, that we have been taught that there are certain sacred places in this particular ecosystems, that the White River was a goddess, or certain hills were meant to be sacred and untouched. In fact, I so rarely, if ever, hear about the land around us as being called sacred at all. But in fact, that is what Unitarian Universalism at its core is meant to remind us of, that we always stand exactly where we are on sacred ground. This is what the Unitarian Universalist theologian Rebecca Parker reminds us. We live in a life abundant world, and we stand on sacred ground, humble, nourished. In fact, one of our primary teachings is on the interdependent web of life. Now, I feel a loss. Forces of colonialism have taken me from my ancestral lands. And they have also broken up that transmission of religious history that might have taught me how to care for this earth around me, and for the air around me, and the waters around me. But we also have another source that could help us. In the text that I mentioned earlier, Mr. Mishra and this Buddhist writing, they recognized how much science has also aligned with these religious traditions, that science will also affirm what places are particularly vital for the ecologies around them. And so I invite us to also bring in our source of science, to work with scientists here in central Indiana, and perhaps with the Hoosier Environmental Council and other environmental groups, to identify what waters, what ground, the air that needs to be protected. How can we begin to build in religious rituals and a language of reverence to propel people forward to an awakening of how sacred this earth is? My dear ones, though there is not an ancient tradition that teaches us to care for the sacred ground that we stand on, we could work together by following our innate spiritual sense and using the guidance of environmentalists and scientists around us to recognize where our faith calls us to help protect the earth, and more to depollute it, to remove contamination, and to let the earth be truly sacred again. May we shift away from a mindset of resource and towards a mindset of awe, sacredness, and interdependence. I think we could do this every day, that we take a moment to stand on sacred earth, to perform a ritual that draws us closer to the air we breathe and the water that we drink and the health of our soil. May we develop such a faith together, and may these rituals guide us back to sustainability. May it be so, and amen. Our closing benediction is written by George Tiger, entitled A Springtime Prayer. O power of springtime, spirit of green grasses and warm breezes, goddess of creativity, of birth, of life renewed, you sing about us at this time. The birds call your sacred name, buds burst forth with your vestment. The sun reaches higher into the sky, shining the light of this new day through the windows of your cathedral, this world. O power of springtime, forgive us our speediness and our racing before your eternal grace, that we do not see the miracle world we share. Open our eyes to your warmth and our hearts to your beauty. Slow our minds with awe and wonder. Dear spirit of green grasses and warm breezes, let us find here in these moments of quiet the grace of your breath as we breathe into our bodies the spirit of spring. May it be so, and may we develop a language and practices of faith that help us into right relationship with this world. If you will now join me in singing hymn number 1064, Blue Boat Home.
All below me I feel the ocean, standing on these mountain plains, far away from the rolling ocean. Still my dry land heart can say, I've been sailing all my life now, never harbor or port have I known. The wide universe is the ocean I drown, and the earth is my home.